Rating risk and earned value management. But first, a little bit about me. I work for a company called BMT HiQ Sigma. I've worked for BMT since 2000, doing all sorts of bits and pieces from project controls. Computer's doing its own thing. I've done quite a lot of work on risk management and earned value management, pulling together risk analysis for main gate business cases and review notes on mainly MOD large projects. I've also taken part in quite a few integrated baseline reviews. I'm currently a member of the APM Risk SIG committee, and I was also a member of the Risk and Earned Value Management Working Group. So what I'm going to talk about is a little bit of background on that working group, a summary on risk management, a summary of earned value management, and a bit of integrating the two processes. So the Risk and Earned Value Working Group was set up in 2005. It was sponsored by the APM Risk and Earned Value SIGs, and the reason it was set up was because a number of papers had been written, and we wanted to explore things a bit more. So we had a mix of both risk professionals and earned value experts. Very few of us knew much about the other discipline at the time, so we all learnt a lot. There was a mix of industries, mainly defence and construction, to give a good mix of experiences. As I said, we started in 2005, and we eventually published our guide in 2008. So what was the aim? We wanted to produce a practical guide rather than a standard or anything else, mainly to understand the interfaces between the two disciplines. We worked with other professional bodies, a number of those are listed there. A lot of work was going on at the time in the States, and so we worked closely with the group there, the NDRA, looking at similar topics. So a brief summary on risk management. So what's risk? It identifies uncertain future events so that could have a positive or negative outcome on our objectives, so will stop us achieving our goals. Through this process, we can identify actions to be put in place to help us mitigate those risks, or on the positive side of things, exploit our opportunities. Risk is, in terms of probability and impact, there's a probability of a risk occurring and an impact on the objectives. One of the things we can do is carry out Monte Carlo simulation to give us our confidence levels, so to identify what our likely impact on our project is in terms of cost and time. Earned value management is really measuring our performance against a baseline that we set. It helps us to identify how we're doing against our plan. It provides us with trends about our progress, and it provides us with some early warning about when things are going wrong and what we might be able to do about them. So it can be used to estimate the outcome of our project. So the group decided that these two disciplines were quite closely aligned in a way, and how could we bring the two more closely together. So you should probably all familiar with this curve of looking at our planned schedule, and then we can measure our progress against it in terms of how much we're spending and what we're actually achieving. So that was our starting point. We talked about whereabouts the two disciplines actually came together. Was it only at the beginning of the programme, or was it throughout the life cycle? And we decided that they probably came together in various points. So this is what we are traditionally used to looking at. We've got a budget of a certain amount, and that is what we believe it's going to cost us over a time phase to actually deliver the scope of the project. But what's that really made up of? We were all familiar with our performance measurement baseline and the fact that we needed some management reserve. So a management reserve is what we have as the provision for identified and emergent risks. And our PMB is what is our budget over the time for our approved plan to actually deliver our scope. So this is what it looks like in terms of curves. We've got our PMB, and on top of that, we've got our management reserve as well, that additional bit. But what is management reserve made up of? And you can read all kinds of things about this, and we came up with lots of arguments about contingencies, and none of us really like that term. But what we finally agreed on was that management reserve should be made up of two elements. First of all, our specific risk provision. So that comes from our risk process. We identify our risks, we identify the probability of them occurring and the potential impacts. We use our Monte Carlo simulation, and we can come up with a set amount of money based on whatever confidence level we agree on. Quite often it's our 50% confidence levels, and that should be put aside as specific risk provision. So that is tied into identified risks. We also decided that there should be an element that is what we called non-specific risk provision, so for those risks that come to light as you go through the programme. And obviously we've got our PMB, which is the approved plan. But that approved plan should also include actions that have been approved to mitigate your risks. So now we've got an additional curve. We've got our PMB, our specific risk provision relating to our risk register, and our non-specific risk provision as well. So we've got the same overall budget, but then it's broken down into our management reserve and our performance measurement baseline, and the MR in turn is broken down into specific risk provision and non-specific risk provision. So what we were looking at is what are the elements of the risk management process as you start from your objective of your project. You identify your specific risk, your strategic risks. You then do some initial risk analysis, and you baseline your risk register. So that's purely the risk side of things. On the earned value management side of things, this is what traditionally we would look at, says you establish your project context, so understand what you're doing. You develop your top-down budgets and schedules, so your initial thoughts on what that should be. You have your statement of work and initial WBS, first of all, to help you identify your budgets and schedule. You would revise this as you get a bit more information. You integrate your OBS and your WBS, establish your control accounts, and that's how you establish your performance measurement baseline. But we decided this was a bit too separate, and actually it's a bit more complex than that, and each of the disciplines feed the other. So what we thought was actually establishing the project context sits somewhere in between, because it helps you identify your strategic risks to begin with, and those in turn will help you break down your budget and schedule a bit better. Once you've run your initial risk analysis, you can identify the actions that you want to put into your PMB, and then that would sort of in turn identify other activities within your schedule that make up your PMB. Once you've established your initial PMB, you baseline your risk register, and then this becomes your approved performance measurement baseline. So this is the basis of your programme. So the question is really, how does risk feed into the baseline? So risks have been reviewed. You use your subject matter experts to identify actions that need to be included to help mitigate, and those get put into your baseline schedule. Your risk analysis is undertaken to inform your PMB, and that becomes your agreed level of confidence. So a bit more about specific risk provision. This is your identified risks. So we can determine it by carrying out our Monte Carlo simulation. It's based on our risk register. We need to make sure they've all included. But not only if we got our risk provision, we can understand what our overall risk exposure might be as well. So depending on what confidence level we have, we've got an additional element that we're not actually going to have in our management reserve, but we need to understand what additional amount we could possibly spend. Non-specific risk provision is a bit more difficult to determine. So what are the sort of things that we can use to inform this? Previous similar projects might inform us. Previous experience of our subject matter experts. And also that element of our risk exposure that we haven't put into our specific risk provision might give us a view on an additional element that we might want to include. So what does it look like? And how do we change things during the life of the programme? From a risk management point of view, we review risks as we go throughout the programme. We can close things as we complete actions and as we better understand where we are. As we achieve project milestones, we can close out risks that haven't impacted, that were associated with it. And we have a greater understanding of the more detail going forward as well. So we update our plan. So from this diagram shows that as you close out risks, you would move elements of your specific risk provision into your non-specific. So your overall budget doesn't change, but those lines do. As we move forward and we've gone through our programme milestones, we've got a better understanding of what the project is going to entail. We've completed actions, possibly some of them are unsuccessful, they haven't actually achieved what we thought they were going to achieve to begin with. We may have changed some scope and we've updated our plan. This means that we need to move some of our budgets from our non-specific risk provision into our specific risk provision, because now they have a risk associated with them that we can tie in with our risk register. But it's not just the threat side of things, it's also the opportunities we need to consider as well. But how about what happens to the PMB? Well, as we move forward and we complete action, or we have previously had actions scheduled that we might now think, as we've reviewed our risks, are not relevant anymore, and we've closed our risks, so actions that were associated with those are no longer relevant, we can move our PMB into our specific risk provision. On the other side of things, as we open actions that are identified in our risk register and plan for them, so give them a specific timescale, give them an owner, and give them a cost resource associated with them, we can move those from the specific risk provision into our PMB. This also might be when we've had a risk that's impacted and we need to put in place our fallback action. It's interesting to note that what we agreed was that you can't move directly from your PMB into your non-specific risk provision or from your non-specific risk provision into your PMB. decided there had to be steps involved. So how else do the two disciplines interface? Really, it's all about helping management decision. Each of the elements of project control, specifically risk management and then value management, give you a certain amount of detail, but we felt that actually the best thing to help you manage your program and to make specific decisions was to use the two bits of information together. So our risk analysis, carrying out our Monte Carlo, gives us a likely turn-in of the project in terms of both cost and schedule. It gives us an idea of how much additional money we might have to spend, and also what sort of delay to the programme that there might be based on those risks that we've identified. Earn value gives us a look at based on our trends and our progress to date. We can look at our schedule performance index. How does that look? How are we doing? Are we on a downward slope or an upward slope? And again, the same with costs. We've also got our estimates at complete and our independent estimates at complete, and this also gives us an idea about how far behind schedule or how much overspend are we going to have. The two elements need to come together to tell you where you're likely to outturn. Bit of a rapid run through, so maybe tell you a bit more information. Really the main things that we said was that an awful lot of projects don't consider risk at the beginning, and not enough management reserve is put in place to look at the risks that impact on programmes. So we decided that this was really the main focus of things, and to help you understand what should be in your performance measurement baseline. Actions that you need to do to mitigate your risks need to be planned. You need to take them into account to get your overall timescales. There's no good telling your client that you're going to achieve a date when actually you're going to have to do an awful lot of mitigating actions. You need a well understood PMB. Everyone, the client and the team itself, need to understand what is included in that PMB, those actions that they need to take, and also you need to understand what's not in your PMB as well. So you need to understand what's in your risk register and what's your possible exposure on top of that. Both disciplines give you valuable information, but using the two together, they can really give you a real understanding of what outturn you might come up with and what sort of delay you might incur and what additional cost you might incur. Are there any questions on that? Does it make sense? That was very basic interfaces that we agreed on. Does anyone think there are any other elements of the two that should come together?
Maybe one question.
Yeah.
When I saw the headline of the presentation, combining risk and earned value,
Yeah.
has there been any consideration given to how you can measure the earned value of the risk management process, or the way that you use up risk?
Well, only in so much as you move your from your management reserve, your specific risk provision, into your PMB, then that becomes part of your PMB that you're measuring against. So you don't measure your earned value on your management reserve as such, but as it moves into your PMB, you're measuring it because it becomes part of your baseline.
But you'll be moving into the PMB the full cost of addressing that risk identified.
Yes.
But within that, if you had a risk profile, you would have had the factored cost of those risks.
Yes.
So So
Mhm.
on the averaging process, if you need to be close, you can move so much risk in at full cost
Yep.
to the P&B, but you need to be writing closing off risks,
Yes.
4 times as many close off to pay for the one risk that you've actually used. I just wondered whether there are any metrics and methods that could be used to say, well, this risk bridge has been working well because we've closed down, removed these so many risks on the register, and we've done it for a smaller cost than we expected to, and we used that to demonstrate whether this has been working.
No specific metrics, but as your overall curve, or the blocks, you would see how you were doing through that, because if you were closing out risks, then that budget should move into your non-specific risk provision. It's definitely something that, as a working group, we wanted to take forward. We wanted to put this information out to begin with and see how it was going to work in practical. So metrics is possibly one thing that we could look at doing. Any other questions? No? Okay. Thank you very much for your time.